Okay, so this is the second short lecture for this week, week six, and I went over and discussed quickly the rise of radio and the rise of the sport superstar, which was a experience in the United States in the 1920s associated with this growth of mass culture and the allowance then of people to be able to listen and experience the same thing all in different parts of the country, making it so that you had more than just simply regional stars. You had the superstar of the whole nation. And of course, what you get beyond this is the growth of, as we mentioned, advertising. So it is not just simply the fact that people are sharing the same radio programs, they're also sharing the same reading materials, the same magazines. You start to see the growth of national newspapers, replacing sometimes smaller, more local news. You, of course, then by the 1940s into the 50s have the rise of television. What we've really seen just in the last 100 years is this nationalization of media, moving into, of course, the era of the internet and social media, and of course, this just becoming more and more universal. And added to this is the fact that something we can't forget is in the last 100 years, we've seen this media, this ability to reach us, taking more and more, getting closer and closer to us on an everyday basis. So, for instance, as I mentioned, magazines and radio in the 1920s, the big aspect of this is you get them in your own home. You can experience them when you would like. Your radio, of course, can be on constantly in the background, and you have this experience that other people throughout the country, if they have radios, do as well. Advertisements, of course, what you get with this is it's not only within the private sphere, it's also within the public sphere. So it is a part of radio, it is a part of newspapers, it is a part of magazines, but then you also have billboards, you have being seen in public places and shops and things of that sort. So faces start to be recognizable, not just from the things that you may or may not read, but you can't hide from it. So, of course, a billboard on the side of a building painted on a face becomes recognizable to everybody. And again, Babe Ruth becomes very much this first kind of superstar. He gets associated with advertising and the pushing of different products. He is by no means the last. And we see this in all sorts of old advertising, in which, of course, the association is often simply put that if you find somebody to be a hero, they are very good to sell a product. Of course, if your favorite baseball player wears a certain type of shoe, if your football player drives a certain type of car, if your favorite tennis player does eats a certain type of potato chip. This is, of course, a method to sell products because, of course, by the 20th century, you start to see, of course, capitalism and the rise of this large advertising society, this large advertising culture, take over and move into a globalized world. It is not just associated with the United States. And in fact, this is a huge aspect of the growth of sporting superstar celebrity nature is as we saw with the growth of mass culture and radio making things much more national in scope than just simply local or citywide, we see as new media starts to develop, advertising moves beyond borders. You have the situation of globalization in the post-World War II years. You see the growth of international sports superstars. So here we see this old Red Grange all-time football favorite Coca-Cola commercial. Not really sure exactly where this and when this is from, but this is, of course, the beginnings of this situation. Coke, food products, clothing products, cars, these are the things that have often been associated with athletes. Of course, you get beyond just the fact that these are people that are respected or that are beloved. You also get you also move into the area where many of these figures are for the opposite sex, or for, of course, somebody that's interested in their own sex. These people they become sex symbols, right? They become things that people want to see them. They want to be like them. They want to be near them in whatever way they can. So, of course, they are depicted in this way. They are also, of course, oftentimes good for selling products to children. Toys, soft drinks, fast foods, cereals. These are things that are often associated with childhood, and of course, this is something that different companies understand, is that many children look up to athletes, want to be athletes, view them as heroes, and are interested in following along with this. Um, However, by the 1970s and 1980s, you start to see the fact that advertisers understand and look for crossover appeal amongst athletes. So, not just specifically dealing with their ability to, say, play football or play baseball. Actually, as we can see here, this is O.J. Simpson, who, of course, becomes infamous by the 1990s for the murder trial in 1994 of his wife, his estranged wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. In the 1970s, he is really seen as being this figure that can cross borders. He is seen as somebody who is not just going to be speaking to children or to men who want to be big and strong and fast like he is, and want to play football or baseball and dream of this still as adults. But he is seen as somebody that has crossover ability, that can speak to a large number of different communities for selling all sorts of things, as we can see here. Boots that have nothing, of course, to do with football, but perhaps most famously is his experience with Hertz Rent-A-Car. He becomes this figure that moves beyond just the world of football. By the 1980s, though, nobody has this role more than Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, of course, becomes the symbol of advertising, the possibility of advertising in the realm of the sports star, moving beyond just, of course, his small area of the world, which is Chicago, of course, and into a national culture, and then very much so an international culture. Michael Jordan is still undoubtedly one of the most recognizable faces in the world today. There is a great story in which a person was an American was visiting Nepal and went out very deep into the country and ran into some Buddhist monks, and they found he was from America, and they asked about Michael Jordan. Now, if that's true or not, it's hard to say exactly, but the fact is that Michael Jordan, of course, became the symbol of a bunch of different hopes and dreams of people throughout the United States, and then the world. Of course, most famously, Michael Jordan is often given credit for changing the way that tennis shoes are understood. The method of creating tennis shoes that are sponsored and associated with one figure, what's very specifically. Of course, Nike became the tennis shoe manufacturer, and still they are seen as this very specifically in terms of its relationship with Air Jordan and Jumpman brand. But of course, Nike was just one of the different companies that Jordan became associated with, that moved him beyond just simply a athlete or a basketball player. Gatorade, of course, in terms of its famous jingles and songs, like Be Like Mike, Coca-Cola, as you can see as we just scroll down here, in terms of Wheaties, Ballpark Franks. The name or the numbers were really quite endless. There was a blowback against this in many different ways. For one thing, of course, you had the attempt by Nike itself to sometimes go against this image and find a different figure. And so Charles Barkley became kind of the foil of Michael Jordan, not just on the basketball court, but in the advertising realm as well in the 1980s and 1990s, as he had his very famous I am not a role model commercials, in which he talks about the fact that he doesn't want to be a role model. He's an aggressive, oftentimes troublesome character on the basketball court. He had off the court issues, which many people forget about now because he has this beloved kind of image as a commentator and a studio analyst. But at the time in the 1990s, he was seen as being a very controversial basketball player who played in a very different style than Michael Jordan. And Nike decided we're going to basically use this and try to go for a different advertising method, depicting Charles Barkley as kind of the anti-Michael Jordan. Um, what though this does change, and there's no question that this is just the new idea of what sports is. Sports then becomes the method, oftentimes, for pushing product. This goes into the realm of sports being and sporting teams being sponsored by different companies. Of course, we can see this in the realm of soccer as they take on different sponsors, marking their jerseys. In American sporting culture, this has not necessarily been something that has been welcome, but we're starting to see it more and more in the realm of basketball jerseys. You start to see different sponsorships. Of course, athletes themselves will become walking sponsors. They will wear only certain clothing, certain types of clothing, certain shoes, certain socks, certain undershirts. They will wear prior to the game, after the game, certain types of sunglasses, headphones, and this is, of course, all a sign of them being product pushers for modern advertising. So this is something that we're undoubtedly going to see more of as we move along, and new methods will be taken. It's interesting to see who will be the next figure that will be this all-encompassing Michael Jordan type advertiser. It's hard to say who fits that mold today, but there undoubtedly will be somebody who will come along and become the new Michael Jordan in terms of the world of advertising, and perhaps even overtake him. So this is something that we'll keep an eye on in the coming years, and it's in no way going to change. In fact, it will just become more so. It's not going to dissipate, that's for sure. So next week we'll be talking about some other topics that are associated with sports in the 21st or 20th and then 21st century, and we're going to look at specifically gender in sports and race in sports.